I think we're going to get started here. Thank you for joining us for the launch of the 2020 State of the Artisanal and Small Scale Mining Sector Report. To open today's event, we are going to have a series of welcome remarks from the World Bank and Pact.
Good morning and good afternoon. I am Dimitrios Papathanasiou. I'm the World Bank's Global Director for the Energy and Extractives Global Practice, and I would like to welcome you to the launch of our 2020 Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining State Report. Artisanal and small-scale mining is the vital livelihood of 44 million people in over 80 countries around the world. Artisanal miners produce a significant portion of the world's minerals and gemstones under difficult and sometimes dangerous working conditions. However, the true impact of their labor is not well known because we don't have good data on their work and their lives. This has an impact on the sector's development and often perpetuates a narrative that small-scale mining is inherently dangerous. It is hurtful for people's lives and for the environment. Since 2016, the World Bank has partnered with Pact through our EGPS Trust Fund, and we created a platform called Delve where we collect data to shine a light on this vital sector's contribution to global economic development. An important part of that work is the State of the Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Sector Report that we are launching today. This year's report examines the contribution of artisanal and small-scale mining in the Sustainable Development Goal 8, the inclusive and sustainable economic growth with full and productive employment and decent work for all. With 80 to 90% of artisanal and small-scale mining being essentially informal and in unsafe conditions, this past year has seen even further difficulties because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, the commitment of governments and companies that are active in the sector to help artisanal and small miners become formalized and improve their occupational health standards is more important than ever. We believe that holistic approaches that improve the working conditions can serve as a platform to scale up the critical agenda of the sector's formalization that will boost inclusive growth and create good jobs and poverty reduction. The World Bank supports the formalization of artisanal and small-scale mining and is committed to seeing the sector improve work practices, social protection measures, and fair labor standards for its workers. We believe that if prioritized, the solutions to integrate decent work into the ASM sector can be straightforward, affordable, and highly effective at improving the daily lives of miners, their families, and communities, but equally improve the balance sheet of mining companies and the revenues in many developing countries. As part of our support to artisanal and small-scale mining, the World Bank, through the EGPS Trust Fund, created an emergency response facility to help them with better coping with COVID-19 related impacts. This emergency response has supported over 26 COVID programs in more than 20 countries around the world. Right now, we're launching a third round calling for expressions to improve things for small-scale miners. I would like to thank you and your organizations for the strong support on this rapid response facility. And I would like again to welcome you in the launch of our 2020 State of the Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Report. Thank you very much.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us virtually. My name is Caroline Anstey. I am President and CEO of Pact, International Development Organization empowering communities around the world to build solutions to development challenges. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the launch of the 2020 State of the Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Sector Report. I'm thrilled to see the 2020 report build on the partnership between the World Bank's Extractives Global Programmatic Support Trust Fund and Pact to develop Delve, the first global database for artisanal and small-scale mining, to see how this partnership has grown to include such a diverse array of contributing institutions and organizations. A testament to this is the many organizations that have contributed case studies and analyses to this year's report, which focuses on the critical theme of decent work and economic growth under Sustainable Development Goal 8. Today's report also builds off the foundation established in the 2019 State of the ASM Sector Report, which explored the origins, impact, and extent of the vast data gap facing the ASM sector. The 2020 report puts the sector and these data gaps even further on the global development agenda through its careful analysis of occupational health and safety, economic growth, gender participation, and child labor, among other topics under the SDG 8 umbrella. The 2020 report brings solutions to light through its analyses and collections of case studies, which demonstrate a range of practical approaches and innovative models to integrate decent work into the ASM sector. These approaches and these models are possible, affordable, and highly effective at improving the daily lives of miners, their families, and their communities. One of the most compelling examples is in the area of occupational health and safety. For the first time, the report benchmarks the safety record of the ASM sector against large-scale mining and other industries. Through committed action, partnership, and investment, we have seen dramatic improvement in occupational health and safety in large-scale mining over the past 40 years. But the same cannot be said for ASM. This report challenges us to consider the collective responsibility that governments, national associations, civil society, international organizations, the private sector, and consumer, in short, all of us, have to improve health and safety for the nearly 45 million women and men who work directly in the ASM sector globally. The report demonstrates how improvements to health and safety for ASM are feasible and can provide immediate impacts to the daily lives of miners, their families, and communities. As Pact, we are grateful to you for joining this important conversation and discussing the latest data and information that demonstrate how decent work can be achieved in the ASM sector. We hope that this event and this report will inspire new action, new collaboration, new learning among all participants beyond today's launch as we seek to strengthen the ASM sector for all those who rely on it, and to make 2021 a year of occupational health and safety for artisanal and small-scale miners around the world. Thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're going to transition now into a report introduction conversation between Professor Gavin Hilson, Dr. Rachel Perks, and Dr. James McQuilkin, managing editors of this year's 2020 State of the Sector report.
Welcome, everyone. My name's Gavin Hilson, and as the DELV Steering Committee Chair and Professor and Chair of Sustainability and Business at the University of Surrey Business School, it's my privilege to co-host today's Africa, Americas, Europe regional launch of the 2020 State of the Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Sector Report. I'm joined by Dr. Rachel Perks, Senior Mining Specialist at the World Bank, and Dr. James McQuilkin, Program Officer for Pact, who are the managing editors of the 2020 report. We wanted to start today's event with a conversation framing the 2020 report to provide some background information about DELV and this second annual State of the ASM Sector report. So to begin, Rachel, could you please tell us about how DELV began, its main aims, and also the link to the annual State of the Sector report?
Great, thanks, Gavin. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I feel like Dimitrios and Caroline have also already sort of captured the key elements. For those of you that have been with us on this journey, it started in 2016, really coming to the realization that we weren't progressing very well on reliable, real-time data on what was happening in the artisanal and small-scale mining sector. Even as far as population was concerned, we were using figures that were, over 30 years outdated. So that was really the genesis, was to try to, break these silos, knowing that a lot of us do a lot of careful data collection in our ongoing programs. It was to try to see how we could capture that data, encourage crowdsourcing in a way of information, and to create a space where all different types of stakeholders who are concerned about the sector, who want to make improvements, who want to know more, could go and find that information. And of course, a big part of that, beyond simply the database, the Delve platform, is this report. And I think Dimitrios captured it really well in saying that, we want to shine a light on the contributions that this sector makes to development. And as you know so well, Gavin, often in these larger international development dialogues on SDGs, there isn't a lot of discussion on ASM, despite the fact that it plays the most prominent sort of non-farm rural income role in many parts of the developing world. So this is really the intention of these reports, is to focus in on these contributions within the context of the SDG conversation. So we ensure that it's well integrated into any type of programming and policy discourse that's going to be arising in the future out of the UN. Thanks, Gav.
Great, and we've heard the theme of this year's report is analyzing ASM's contribution to SDG 8, which is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Could you talk me through why you chose to focus on SDG 8?
I think quite simply, it's the most tangible human expression, of the sector, focusing on the lives of people, the work that they do, and the very real challenges that, family members, whether it's children, whether it's women or it's men, are facing in their daily lives, working in these mines. And so it's one that is easily relatable. And it's also, an SDG that, quite frankly, we haven't really focused enough concerted effort on. We have a lot of very prominent global alliances on different aspects of improvements to ASM formalization. We still really haven't cracked some of the most fundamental issues around what are the conditions in which people are working when they show up at a mine site day to day. And just as we're concerned about issues of conflict-free sourcing, we should be concerned about the ways in which people are laboring on a day-to-day. And so it seemed like an opportunity to take stock of what partners are doing around the world, so that we could offer some very tangible examples to the global community on how to reduce child labor, how to eliminate mercury, how do we promote gender equality, how do we address some of the most fundamental OHS challenges, so that we could use these case studies as a catalyst, and also to obviously be able to demonstrate that these don't have to be elaborate, expensive projects and programs and interventions, but one little change on a mine site could make a world of difference for miners, and also, for the companies that they work with. So that was really the intent behind choosing SDG 8.
Great, and the report, it's a tremendous achievement that would not have been possible without the case study contributions from people who are based at a variety of organizations and institutions connected to the ASM sector. James, could you share a little more about the process of developing the report, the diversity of the case studies, and how the report is organized?
Absolutely, thank you, Gavin, and Rachel there as well. Yeah, so as the slide shows on the screen, really, it's a wealth of contributors, and we're really grateful for everyone that took the time to share their lessons and share their projects. So practically in terms of once we'd settled on SDG 8 for the reasons outlined, we actually began in October 2019. We made a public call through a range of forums and communication channels, including the IGF forum in Geneva. And essentially, interested contributors were then asked to fill in a very simple online form before then participating in an online presentation where we presented this idea of SDG 8, its importance, and the 5 focus areas that we've chosen under SDG 8. And yeah, as again, as the slide shows, it really, the immediate response was a great testament to the kind of interest and willingness of the global ASM community there. So thank you. So then in terms of those case studies, well, we worked hard to ensure that we had good geographical spread to make sure it really was and is a global report, and also reflect the range of stakeholders working in this space. So there's 22 case studies with contributions from 59 experts that represent over 30 organizations, which is a huge, again, testament to that global community there. And this includes international bodies, as you can see from some of the logos, as well as multiple international and national NGOs, mining associations, and crucially, the voice of miners coming through there through different organizations. And also, of course, we had institutions including, more academic institutions such as the British Geological Survey, as well as multiple universities. So finally, in terms of how it's structured as the report, so like I said, we took SDG 8, we looked at the targets. When I say we, I mean Delve as a team. We looked at the targets and indicators and broke it down into 5 key areas, and that's the structure of the report. So very quickly, those 5 key areas, and the rest of this launch event today kind of reflects those areas. The first one is occupational health and safety. Second is stimulate economic growth. Third is make production sustainable and eliminate mercury. Fourth is ensure gender equality. And 5th is eradicate child labor and promote youth employment. So yeah, that's the structure of the report. Thank you, Gavin.
Great. Thank you, James. For each of you and the authors of the 22 case studies, it's really exciting to see this information compiled in such a thoughtful way. And now to be able for it to be released to a global audience and discourse. I'd like to ask you to reflect on the significance, each of you, the significance of an annual report for the ASM sector as a whole and the work each of your institution does. How does the report address some of the pressing needs that have been identified with the sector in the context of decent work and SDG 8 specifically, and what does it mean for the work your respective institutions are focused on?
I think just to start, Gavin, I mean, from a personal perspective, so many of us that are online today and those who couldn't make it, but who I know will read the report with interest, we've been working in the sector for decades, and sometimes we can get very discouraged about what we feel is like little progress on really fundamentally important issues. And I can tell you, in having read through the case studies, edited them, I mean, I feel like I know them all by heart. I was so encouraged and really found a renewed sense of energy about issues that I've been working on for a long time, where I felt like, we just weren't getting to scalable solutions. So from a personal perspective, I think that's what the report represents, is really a rallying point for us. And especially in this time of COVID, an opportunity to really think positively again about what we can do, especially in this time when there's so much disruption that actually presents us with immense opportunities. I think secondly, as an institution, the World Bank has been committed for countless decades to the case of formalization. And this again is an expression of that commitment. And one that really puts people at the center of the development agenda. And a third area, I think, is more of a team theme, is that, the issue of occupational health and safety is such a critical issue. And this figure that we've arrived at this year of benchmarking the sector really could not have been done without the efforts of one of our dear colleagues, Dylan McFarlane. And with his passing this year, we also really wanted to provide, a spotlight on this one issue, to make this our campaign issue this year because A, it's critical, but also in B, in memory of the contributions that he has made over his career to the betterment of the working conditions of artisanal miners. Thank you, Gav.
Thank you, Rachel. James?
Yeah, certainly I would echo and agree with all of that, and add, I think, from my personal point of view, it's a collective voice really for the global ASM community, and in some way provides a future vision for what the ASM sector with regards to SDG 8, from which all these other issues also hang off, can be possible, and a mandate really to advance that decent work agenda of economic growth. And I think crucially, the process of developing the report over the course of a year in this very bizarre year and tumultuous year with the pandemic has also, again, been almost a celebration of the kind of power, working together, different actors in this space can achieve and sharing those lessons. And then I think second really is that from the perspective of Pact, well, it's an opportunity to learn from our peers as well, and to work with them. And we believe that really the report, the case studies, the lessons, its broad reflections and findings really are immensely valuable to learn from and to be able to connect with our partners working in this space and across our health and mining programs. And we see OHS 2021 as being a real way to champion that nexus of health and ASM. So yeah, in that regard, really, the 2020 report provides a call to action, a very clear call to action, and sets an agenda that we can all work towards around OHS in all of our programs and projects going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, James. And for us at the University of Surrey, just quickly, the business school specifically, we had a Delve launch in 2017, which was terrific. It brought together a number of key players in the ASM community, and we're all working towards the same goals. And what the Delve report really, the State of the Sector report really does is it brings us all together, and it provides a platform for sharing ideas. And it's been really terrific to see how this space has evolved over the past couple of decades, and it's really come together, I think, with the launch of Delve, because it's brought different voices to the table, and it's enabled us to share very valuable experiences that can help people across the world in different contexts facing different challenges. So that's what we've been very grateful for, our researchers at the Surrey Business School.
Thank you so much for being our test group to try this. We're looking to create a poll here, a polling environment where we can present some of the key messages from this year's State of Sector reports themes, and kind of test what you think is a myth or a fact in some of the polling features here on Zoom. So with that, I'm going to show the first myth, and James, if you'd like to introduce that, we'll open up the poll.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm just waiting for the screen to come up. I can see it now. Great. So yes, this is our myth and fact segment, as Nathan introduced. It's time to get interactive and do some learning together based on key messages and reflections from the State of the Sector report. So the first myth or fact that we're asking you to vote on is this one. Artisanal and small-scale mining has always been more dangerous than large-scale mining. That's ASM has always been more dangerous than large-scale mining. So you should now have a poll appear in front of your screen. You should select which one you want. And then in a few seconds, we will end the polling, and we will see what's come out. At the moment, we're going upwards. We're climbing to about 100 out of 171 of you on the line voting. Currently, we're at 60 to 30%. And I think as the votes have come in, they've slowed down coming in now. So we'll end the polling. You've had 30 seconds. And we see there that 62% of you voted that this was a myth, and 38% of you said it was a fact. So we shall now reveal whether it was a myth or a fact. Next slide. Great. So actually, it's a myth. The world's large-scale mining industry was actually once as unsafe as artisanal and small-scale mining. And this is a key finding of the report. So let me tell you more about the data behind this statement. So we can see here on the slide, And this is actually in the first case study of the Dell report, where we present the fatality frequency rate model for artisanal and small-scale mining. And then we also compare it to published data on large-scale mining. And just to be clear, the FFR is the number of fatalities per 1 million hours worked. So while the data for large-scale mining is actually relatively easy to track down on this, including going back, certainly for some countries, several, 80, 60, several decades rather, as you can see from the graph, right back to the 20s and 30s. As ever, the same cannot be said for artisanal and small-scale mining. And indeed, it was our late colleague Dylan who actually developed this model. And he was really a true advocate for mine safety, as we highlighted. And he'd been collecting a record of some of the ASM incidents and disasters reported in the media over the last couple of years. And using this information for kind of triangulation, as well as data that was published by the ILO in 1999. And in that data, they drew on a survey of national government officials where they asked them to estimate the number of deaths in ASM per year. Dylan was able to develop a model to calculate the fatality frequency rate for ASM and then compare it. So if we look to the right-hand side of the slide here, we see that in the 1970s, industrial coal mining in the USA had a fatality frequency rate of 0.54. If we look at the South Africa gold mining industry in the 1970s, it was 0.63. And when we took the data from the ILO report for 1999 for ASM, we came out with a fatality frequency rate of 0.52. So that's actually, showing us that we can say that the ASM sector had a similar fatality rate in 1999 as the USA and South Africa's large-scale mining sector did in the 1970s and 80s. Essentially, there was a point in time, not that long ago, when it was acceptable for large-scale mining to be as dangerous as ASM can be today. So we then triangulated, or Dylan mainly, triangulated the Delve estimates. So we took the total number of workers in ASM estimated by Delve, and we used that to triangulate, and it comes out at about 30,000 fatalities per year. So you can see that last line on the marker on the slide there. So this is, so in that case, we're saying that 0.5 is not an unlikely fatality frequency rate also for currently for 2020. Meanwhile, you can see that the other data point there saying that the large-scale mining sector has continued to improve over the last 40 years. You can see this downward trend. And the ICMM, the International Council for Mining and Metals, actually report a fatality rate of their members of near zero today. So on to the next slide. So how has the large-scale mining industry improved? And what lessons can we learn from them? Well, aside from increased mechanization, which certainly has led to safety improvements in large-scale mining, and also reduced, quite simply, the number of people working in mines. Frankly, it's also become unacceptable in our wider society for mining to be such a dangerous and risky occupation. And it's this that has led, we argue, that has led to significant investments from governments and mining companies to improve safety. One great example is the US Department of Labor's Mine Safety and Health Administration. Established in 1977, they now have quarterly training calls that are online and recorded. You can access them now. And they have an annual budget of $376 million. So in the report, we therefore asked the question, what if we applied the same approach or even a fraction of that level of investment, support, and funding in ASM? Could we also reach the same achievements in decent work that have occurred in large-scale mining in the past 40 years for ASM? Next slide, please. So through 3 case studies, which make up this first focus area of the 2020 report, we illustrate that improvements in ASM are indeed feasible and beneficial to all. And I will now hand over to a case study author, Daniel Limpet-Law, who will provide us with a very practical example based on the case study in the report from Rwanda of how improvements in mine safety can also have economic returns for small-scale mining. Daniel, over to you.
Thanks very much, James. And at the start of this, I'd also just like to acknowledge Dylan. He was at the other end of many of the tape measures when we were measuring distances underground in Rwanda. I have time to just outline 3 main areas where I think there is a potential for improving health and safety in underground small-scale mines. The first is mine planning, the second is ground support, and the third is materials handling. So if you could take me to the next slide, please. I'll start off with mine planning. Essentially, one would have mine planning so that you can have a better allocation of resources, and it also results in safer extraction. This allows small-scale miners to understand where their ore bodies are and to extract material in a safer way. It's quite easy to do this. We used a 30-meter tape measure and a cell phone app for measuring inclination, and just doing transects through the workings. We were able to construct these three-dimensional plots. We used a free online software package called Plotly to do this, but you could also just draw it by hand. And we showed the small-scale miners that it was very simple to be able to follow the flow of their ore and to trace the lie of the veins and to efficiently extract their materials. This leads me to the second point that I want to make, and that is on ground support. So Nathan, if you can give me the next slide, please. In Rwanda and in many other places in the world, small-scale miners rely on timber props and timber sets. And you can see in the photograph here a tunnel. It's about 50 meters underground that's being supported very adequately by timber sets installed by small-scale miners in Rwanda. Now, one of the problems is that if you don't set this out on a scientific basis, your inclination is to put in more rather than less. And we determined that the small-scale miners were putting in these timber sets at about half-meter spacings. Now, years ago, the US Bureau of Mines put out a paper showing how you could calculate the strength of these timber sets and how you should design them. So two things come out of that. One is that if you put small horizontal pieces of wood at the top of these timber sets, those deform and break first. Once they start breaking, you then know that you need to replace the timber in your set to keep the roof of the tunnel up. So instead of having to replace the entire timber set, you just replace those little sacrificial crush blocks. And that's what's shown in the figure next to the photograph. And this is taken from a 1962 publication. So it's old technology, been around for a long time, and isn't rocket science. Nathan, if you give me the next slide, please. I can show you how the spacing would change. So if you look at the very last column of that table, these are mine sites producing tantalum in Rwanda. And we worked out using very simple calculations that the spacing would, in the shallower workings, be more than a meter and slightly more than half a meter in the deeper workings. So that allows the small-scale miners to use considerably less timber and less effort installing these timber sets for the same level of safety. That allows them to be more productive and to have better livelihood outcomes per unit of effort. The next thing that I want to talk about is materials handling. As most of you will know, material in small-scale mines is generally moved by hand. And this is a very nice video, I think, of a small-scale mining conveyor belt. I'm hoping it's going to start moving, and you can see the extreme amount of work that's going into moving this material uphill. If you give me the next slide, please, Nathan. There are about 12 people in this conveyor belt moving material about 15 meters up a hill, and it takes them most of the afternoon. Now, what we did was to show that if you replace that with a mechanized zip line, and if I can have the next slide, please, Nathan, something that looks a little bit like this. It costs around $3,000 to source from a South African fabricator. We could move around 5 tons an hour. And if you press the button one more time, Nathan, we could show that where there are high densities of small-scale mines, and there are about 7 mines in this particular Google image, so we could link them all up with the one zip line and move 5 tons an hour up the hill, releasing the people who were previously in the human conveyor belt to continue mining. Because if you spend your whole afternoon moving materials, you can't be extracting it underground, which means that the costs per person per hour go up. So one of the things that we tried to do was to improve efficiency and production while preserving livelihoods. And I think this is an example of how that can be done. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It really is a fantastic case study, and please do go and read it in the report. And based on this, one of the main reflections we make is that investments is urgently needed, since improving occupational health and safety in ASM is a collective responsibility, which is both feasible and beneficial to all. And against that reflection in the report, we also provide some key actions there, as you can see on the right. So thank you very much. That's the OHS myth or fact section. I will now pass over to Nathan for the next myth or fact. Thank you.
Thank you, James. We're going to keep moving along here to make up some time. We are going to release our second poll for this myth or fact. The question is, at its peak in 2012, ASM contributed 17% to the national GDP for Guyana. So you should see the poll available to you to vote. And it seems like we're pretty well on the fact side of this. Give this a couple more seconds for folks to get their votes in, but it seems like most people have sniffed this one out, let's say. All right, I'm going to end the poll there. So to share the results, we have 90% of you all, or 89%, saying that this is a fact, and indeed, it is a fact. In the case of Guyana, nearly all of the gold produced between 1996 and 2015 came from indigenous small-scale miners. So its contribution can be quantified by default when you look at the exports and national production. Stimulating economic growth is really a key component to Sustainable Development Goal 8. There are other examples of studies and data on ASM's contribution to economic growth. In Rwanda, we see, like Guyana, the majority of mining is classified as small scale based on the size of investment. The sector is reported to contribute 2.5% of GDP in 2018, making it one of the country's top exporters. In Uganda as well, though, not a formal statistic, a 2018 study also emphasized ASM's great economic potential in terms of contributing to GDP by stating if the ASM sector was moved to be formally recognized, it would increase GDP by upwards of 5%. And so though we have these examples, and we know anecdotally that ASM is an engine for local development in many rural contexts, the point we make in the State of the Sector report really is that in terms of quantitative data for ASM's economic contribution that speaks to policymakers, most countries don't have that data available, and the sector's importance, economic importance, is often under-recognized when we consider the SDG 8 agenda. So in the 2020 report, we make the case that data which underscores the economic importance of ASM is critical and essential to understanding the ways that finances fuel production in the sector and its growth, as well as how the sector creates linkages to other industries. And crucially, this economic data, we believe, can bolster the case for formalization of the sector. In the 2020 report, the case studies you'll find really go a long way in helping to fill some of these economic data gaps. We have 5 case studies in the report. They illustrate a wide range of ASM formalization strategies that are underway in a variety of contexts. And they do a great job of showing how, despite the complexities and challenges, economic data is really essential to gaining this understanding of the ASM sector, how it influences markets, different labor dynamics, and how it has the potential to be harnessed to be this local economic growth engine that can fuel development. And so with that, I want to bring in some of our case study authors. We're joined by 2 case study authors from this section. Let's start with Peter Doyle. Peter, if you're there, you can unmute yourself. I just want to bring you in. Peter is the chief of party for USAID's artisanal gold mining program, Oro Legal, in Colombia. And in your case study, Peter, you spoke to the economic benefits of formalization. I'm just wondering if you can share more here with the audience about your experience in managing this program, especially looking at the Colombian context with the interlinkages between illegal and informal activity, and how, as a program, Oro Legal was able to bolster the illicit economic development in Colombia. So Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Nathan. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you clearly. Thank you, Peter.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome. Good morning, afternoon, evening to to my fellow participants here in the event. Thanks to Del for putting it together. I was just looking at the report that you circulated this morning, and you've certainly done a tremendous job. and as many contributors have said, it's important maybe to begin to change some of the paradigms that we traditionally hold dear when we talk about ASM or ASGM in our particular case. Oro Legal was a 5.5-year initiative. It was implemented by the US Agency for International Development. It remains the largest small mining initiative in its global portfolio. It was implemented by a US company, Chemonix International, here in Colombia over 5.5 years. What did we find, very briefly? And I'm inspired by your myth or fact focus on this section. So maybe I'll identify some of the myths maybe that we try to address in this particular piece of work. I think the first thing that was interesting was that that in Colombia and more generally, as has been said before, many people tend to view either explicitly or implicitly that small miners are inherently bad. They're going to do damage pretty well everywhere where they go, and they have no ability or interest in becoming legal or formal. The project identified 630 mining production units over the first 24 months of operation. Of that group, we ultimately ended up fully legalizing and formalizing 146 mining production units spread over 12 projects. It was easier to legalize and formalize mines when they're linked together in some coherent economic logic. Is that a good performance or not? The figure was about 15%. People in the sector that I talk to say it's tremendous. People that don't work in the sector look askance and say only 15%. I think the reality is, if we assume that there's probably about 500,000 people eking out a living from small mining in Colombia, if 15% of them were to become legal and formal and entrenched in a illicit economy, that'd be 75,000 people, which would be a very, very significant contribution. No, the second myth I think that we were able to challenge was the fact that a lot of organizations think that even if miners can approach some level of legality, ultimately they're not capable of improving their mining practices in any way. We tried to actually to show that with data. I know data, the importance of data has been mentioned previously, and for us it was critical. We wanted to move beyond subjective estimations of how well miners are doing. And so what we did, we worked with the Ministry of Mines and Energy in Colombia to put together quite a rigorous formalization standard, which included base level documentational compliance to become legal. And it also included probably more than 300 separate items that spanned technical mining performance, environmental performance, social, environmental, business performance. And we monitored quarterly the performance of mines over a 5-year period. Of the group that ultimately ended up becoming formal, the 146 mines that I mentioned earlier, all of those mines achieved an average performance of above 75%, and some of those were close to 90%. So against a rigorous formalization standard, a range of mines from very small to medium-sized were capable of significantly improving their mining, their environmental, and their social and business performance over an average period of about 2.5 years. And the final thing, which I guess is relevant for this section, is this myth that ultimately it's not profitable to become legal or formal. And I think what we found during the project was, from a mining perspective, it's definitely profitable, in part because if you're selling your gold on illicit markets, you're always suffering a significant discount In Colombia, it's probably in the order of 25 to 30%. With international gold prices as they are at the moment, losing 25 to 30% of that income stream is significant and provides a very, very strong economic argument to become legal. From a donor perspective, the donor, they invested $22.5 million and probably reaped about $195 million in legal sales. And finally, those 146 mines, on average, were capable of contributing $100,000 a year in royalties, taxes, and social security payments, which writ large can underpin sustainable economic development in places that really need it. So thanks for the time, Nathan.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for those insights and sharing the achievements of the project. I want to just switch to invite Dr. Ruby Stockland-Weinberg, who's a program manager from GemFair, an initiative from De Beers engaging artisanal diamond miners in Sierra Leone. Ruby, your case study co-authored with your colleague Constantine spoke about the program's pilot, use of forward purchasing agreements to provide miners with access to finance and stimulate growth. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more with us just about background to that project and how you're able to, blend this access to finance through non-traditional forms and what impact it had on generating growth for these operations. And recognizing time, Ruby, if you can kind of keep your comments, let's try to aim for that a brief kind of 2-minute kind of synopsis, and we can hopefully have time for more discussion with the group afterwards. But Ruby, over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nathan. I also really want to acknowledge our team on the ground in Sierra Leone, without whom this program would not have been possible. So by way of background, we know that market access is a significant barrier for, apologies. So market access is really a significant barrier for miners. And we know that a lot of initiatives are trying to solve for that, including GemFair. What we realized is that one of the key issues that keeps miners in a state of economic dependency is that they can't access financing on fair terms. So even though many artisanal diamond miners wanted to participate in GemFair from the get-go, they weren't able to sell us their diamonds because those diamonds were already basically pre-sold to another financier. So we saw it as an imperative to offer a fair path to financing as part of our program. Therefore, we developed a revenue and cost sharing approach, meaning that if the miner is successful, we are as well. But if they aren't successful, the miner isn't perpetually in debt to us. We call this a forward purchase agreement program. So the way it worked is participants have to be GemFair members. They have to develop a contract with us so that the miner and GemFair, we agree jointly on a work plan and on the budget for the season. And then we provide the capital for that season's work in exchange for the right to forward purchase the miner's production. In terms of the economic and operational impacts of the program, I do want to emphasize that there were some disruptions due to the pandemic last year. And although we did continue to finance the miners during that program, our results may have been a bit impacted by that. So we are running the program again this year and we'll continue to report on our findings. But that being said, our preliminary findings are that when you have this kind of relationship with a miner, in the first place, it gives you a lot more leverage over important areas like labor standards, so around wages, around records keeping and safety at the mine site. And there's also really big potential for improvements on things like productivity by introducing better prospecting techniques and diamond washing equipment. And this brings about a win-win alignment of incentives. So we are gaining as they are gaining. And the program really served as a great avenue for us to build trust with our mineral suppliers as a transparent and credible buyer. So I just want to finish really quickly with a call to action. I think that one of the things we need to do as practitioners in the sector is sit down and discuss how financing can be incorporated into responsible sourcing programs, because it's not just about providing a route to market. We really realized that early on in GemFair's implementation, and offering a fair price is not going to incentivize miners to come to the table. They need other things. So I hope that we can make that working group a reality. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nate.
Great, thank you, Ruby, for that. And just to wrap up our conversation, we offer this reflection in the report about the need for better data on ASM's economic contribution through improved national statistics to really prove the value of ASM that we see in these case studies towards contributing to national and global growth. And so you can see the report to find out more of those specific actions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to James, who's going to go take us to our next myth and fact, and we're going to try to shorten the voting period here for folks.
Thank you, Nathan. Yes, so our third myth or fact is introducing improved mineral processing technology to ASM is only successful if the mineral recovery rate is increased to 100%. So is this a myth or a fact? Whether introducing mineral processing technology to improve recovery rates can only be considered successful if it reaches 100%. So I think, again, we're quite clear cut here. Most people saying, indeed, that is a myth. And yes, in fact, as we show on the next slide, we're saying this is a myth as well. Increasing recovery rates from as low as 20 to 30%, even up to 50, 60, 70% is actually a significant improvement for artisanal small-scale mining. And especially by using low cost, easy to implement approaches, they really can have a dramatic positive impact. So in the 2020 report, along this line, we do argue that targeted interventions in certain key areas can act as entry points to wider formalization. By addressing one area such as mercury or gender or responsible sourcing, that can act as a springboard to then build trust with people you're working with the ASM communities, and provide entry points that also have important positive impacts on the broader decent work reforms. And again, through the report, this is really shown by the diversity of case studies that show a range of kind of formalization models. So now in this regard, we will turn to Clive Mitchell of the British Geological Survey, who was also one of the case study authors in the report. And Clive, you wrote about the ongoing collaboration between yourselves and the University of Nairobi with an ASM cooperative in Kenya around improving recovery rates for gold. So over to you there to tell us a bit about your case study in a couple of minutes.
Great, thanks, James. Hopefully you've got my slide of the gold ore. If you could show that one. Here we go, everyone. So what we're looking at here, this is an image taken from a very thin slice of gold ore from an artisanal gold mine in Migori County in southwest Kenya. Now, this slice of rock is thin enough for light to pass through it and for the minerals to be examined using a microscope. And you can clearly see the gold particles. They're the golden looking blobs there, sitting between quartz and feldspar, and they're the sort of lighter and darker grey minerals that surround it. Now, Migori Gold Mining District is very active. In fact, our remote sensing analysis from the British Geological Survey using satellite images of the mining district show that over the last 15 years, the number of mining sites has increased roughly tenfold, from about 5 mining sites in 2005 to about 57 sites last year in 2020. Now, this is a hard rock mining area. You're aware that in gold mining, you can have alluvial mining, which is usually in panning in streams and rivers, but then often you have to mine down to the ore, down to maybe tens of meters potentially to get to the productive zones. And this usually involves sinking fairly dangerous looking vertical shafts. And then when you take the ore out, and in Migori, they used hammers to crush the ore. And one of the hallmarks of Migori is of the use of these Tanzania-designed ball mills, which are incredibly noisy. It's very deafening, so it's an easy way to find the mine site, just follow the noise of the ball mill. And this is then followed by sluice blocks processing, then panning of the concentrates, and mercury amalgamation to produce small balls of sponge gold. Now, looking at this thin section, we did a lot of analyses and samples using a scanning electron microscope because, unfortunately, the gold's incredibly fine. And we found that the average side of the gold is 3.5 microns. Now, to put that in context, a micron is 1,000th of a millimeter. Now, this means that the average gold particle is about 100 to 200 times smaller than the sort of average sand grain. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is significant because the technologies used commonly to recover gold in Migori are gravity-based mineral processing methods. So talking about sluice box and panning. Now, these rely on the fact that gold is very heavy, and it's about 7 times heavier than quartz and feldspar, which means that normally gold can easily be separated from the impurities such as quartz and feldspar by exploiting the difference in this physical property. However, this only really works when the particles are of a certain size, and below 100 microns, these methods do not work very well at all. Unfortunately, this means that much of the gold processed using sluice boxes is lost in the wash water. So this is the water that's washed over the sluice, and the gold is often just then lost into the tailings, which is the waste material. And we calculated as much as 85% of the gold may be lost this way, which is a pretty poor reward for the hard work of the artisanal miners in extracting the rock from the mines, crushing and milling it, and then processing it. The winners in this situation are clearly the owners of the cyanidation plants that buy the tailings from the miners and then treat the tailings where most of the gold sits. So there are alternatives to this. There are alternative gravity-based mineral processing methods such as shaking tables, which are much more efficient at recovering smaller particles. And we've calculated that using this method, this will enable the recovery of up to 80% of the gold from Migori, which would switch the situation around from only recovering 15% up to 80%. That's the best case scenario. Now, the Migori County Artisanal Miners Cooperative, or MICA, who we've worked with, have established a demonstration plant to promote adoption of shaking tables and other gravity-based mineral processing methods such as bowl concentrators. And this is alongside other things such as retorts to reduce the amount of mercury used and lost into the environment. And the British Geological Survey, who I work for, in collaboration with the University of Nairobi, are working with MICA to help enable this step change in artisanal gold mining, gold recovery in Migori. And MICA were instrumental in instituting another change in mining practice. Those noisy ball mills were only introduced in the last 5 or 10 years, and this made a big difference to the milling of the ore. So we're confident that MICA have the sort of the credibility in the mining community to help affect this change. And we've also made contact with the Kenyan Ministry working on the Minamota, nearly finished, Convention National Action Plan. And I think these changes will represent a transformative improvement in the livelihoods and lives of the miners in Migori. Sorry, James, did I overrun?
No, thank you so much, Clive. Yes, we just have a few more, but that's really interesting. And again, please do check out the case study in the report there. And it's also why, reflection number 3 here is about having targeted interventions such as that one that Clive described really can have multiple impacts, especially by working with different partners. We're going to jump to our next myth or fact. Back over to you, Nathan, for this one.
Great, thanks, James. Yes, our 4th myth or fact here, folks, is 60% of countries that with ASM do not have published data on female participation. So we're going to start the poll. And again, if you can get your votes in quickly here. Do you think this is a myth or a fact? Seems like the results are kind of skewing heavily towards this being a fact. I'm going to close the poll there and share the results. About 93% of you thought it was a fact, and indeed it is a fact. And so this analysis is based on data available in the Delve platform that has been compiled through an extensive literature review beginning in 2019. And if we're being precise, we only have data on female participation out of 25 countries out of the 78 countries that have employment data in the Delve platform. And we really use this analysis to reflect on the issue of promoting gender equality as a critical component to achieving SDG 8. Looking even further at the data, we can see that this limited data set is really out of date as well, that over 60% of these national data points actually come from sources that were published over 10 years ago. And so the point we're trying to emphasize here is just not about the specific data points for each country, but really when we look at the sector globally, women remain largely invisible in the data on ASM. And so the 2020 report really points to this critical global data gap, but it also features 4 compelling case studies that really outline powerfully how women make up a significant portion of the ASM workforce, and they also face specific forms of workplace discrimination. And so what I think is really valuable about a lot of these case studies is that they demonstrate the importance of local place-based efforts that, as opposed to abstract policy making, and they really cover a range of gemstone value chains from the Association of Women in Mining in Africa and Moyo Gems to gender mapping and access to finance initiatives in Indonesia. So we really would love for you to check those out and see really, I think, through them that there's such a potential for organizing structures to really strengthen individuals, women's standing in ASM. And so with that, to keep moving, I want to bring in Dr. Priya Balamiller, who is currently managing the Palmyra Partners as a consultancy on natural resource governance and sustainable development. But in your previous role, Priya, you wrote about Surrey's work supporting the Ethiopian Ministry of Mines to develop their ASM sector. While your case study was focused on the economic growth of this sector, we're asking you maybe to speak a little bit here about how, what's specifically targeting of women in achieving Ethiopia's growth and transformation plan, especially in the ASM sector. What does that look like? What type of strategies are being employed? So Priya, I'll give you the floor and ask that you just let's try to keep it to about 2 minutes so we can move on to have some more discussion with the other participants too after this.
Great, thank you so much, Nate. And again, appreciate the opportunity to speak today. And I do so speaking to the supporting Ministry of Mines project in Ethiopia that's funded by Global Affairs Canada. But I do speak today in an independent capacity. So I'd like to start by noting Ethiopia's Growth and Transformation Plan, or GTP, is really an aspirational framework. I think most of us in this community of practice can really appreciate how much ASM is really a nested governance space that's quite complicated. And quite often global progress in the ASM sector is pegged to global development targets, such as the SDGs. So in Ethiopia's case, what I'm going to do now is sort of zoom out from the mine site level, where most of the previous colleagues have spoken about very specific mine site level interventions, and now zoom back up that governance chain to a federal framework that's really aspirational in nature, seeing that it wants to ensure that Ethiopia's mining sector contribution to GDP moves up from the current rate of about 2% to 10% by 2025. So within the Growth and Transformation Plan, both gender equity and ASM formalization are really fundamental to realizing that vision. And the Ministry of Mines in Ethiopia has responded in kind through its policy interventions, particularly through the Surrey-supported ASM roadmap. And here I'd really like to acknowledge the contributions of my colleague, Rahel Getachew, who was really instrumental in shepherding that policy process. Now, as part of developing that roadmap, a number of baseline analyses were conducted, and that analysis really confirmed what we see in so many other ASM jurisdictions, that women are not well represented in grassroots miners associations. They also face a higher barrier to entry to the sector in terms of the licensing regime, and bear a disproportionate burden in terms of exposure to toxics such as through mercury. Moreover, what's really interesting also when you look at this issue from that lens of nested governance systems, we see that mechanisms for public consultation, particularly for infrastructure around larger scale mining projects, often have differential impacts on women in the artisanal sector, and yet consultative mechanisms to understand those impacts simply don't exist or are very weak. So in an effort to tackle these blind spots, the ministry established a gender equity working group, has completed gender competence training and a number of capacity assessments with a view to improving gender sensitive input into the Ethiopian mineral sector strategy more broadly. And it's important to note here that the supporting Ministry of Mines project really takes the view that it's important that public sector competence on gender equity is really strengthened if we're to see real gains on the ground for the ASM sector as well. And I think all of these efforts are really laudable. But friends, I would also be remiss in papering over the crisis unfolding in Ethiopia's Tigray region, which is a key gold producing area with over 130,000 artisanal miners. And that data is confirmed by 2 separate academic studies. Now, from an intersectional gender lens, what's really important to note is that most of those miners are young, they're male, and they're landless. And what the unfolding crisis dims hope for is that the formalization of the sector could have been a really robust way to incorporate youth into the formal economy as a really important conflict prevention strategy. Now, within the Surrey project, there's been a consistent policy recommendation that the government engage with grassroots women's rights organizations to amplify their capacity to work on ASM. There's a strong historical legacy of strong women's movement in Ethiopia, but that movement needs to also be mobilized to advocate on ASM specific issues. So as an example, the central bank in Ethiopia is a key purchaser of artisanal gold, and that system functions through an incentive system on a price premium that's currently set about 5%. And I understand from colleagues on the ground that that's set to grow to almost 30%. And being able to now unpack that from a gender disaggregated data lens to see whether those benefits are actually accruing to women on the ground would be an important next step.
Great, great.
So just to close out really quickly here, I'll recall James C. Scott's work, Seeing Like the State, How Certain Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed. It's quite a glorious title, but it's instructive for ASM formalization efforts in Ethiopia and beyond. So in it, Scott cautions that a failure for efforts like formalization are likely if states assume that their grand administrative designs can really exert control over our social and natural worlds. And they'll also fail if the state power is marshaled to achieve these grand designs in an unrestricted manner, and while civil society lacks the capacity to really question and participate in these plans. So just to close, I'd like to say that ultimately any formalization effort will largely depend to what degree policy frameworks like the GTP in Ethiopia continue to deliver on a state's commitments to inclusive and stakeholder-driven policy implementation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Priya, for that. And it's a really good segue into our final myth. And so I'm gonna hand it back over to James. We're gonna open up the polling as it's related to national ASM associations.
Brilliant, thank you, Nathan. So yes, the final myth or fact: working with national and regional ASM associations is essential to achieving the decent work agenda. And we look at the polling, and yeah, I think we were at, oh no, we've opened the polling now, sorry, that was the last one. So it's 100% already going for this being a fact. Leave it for a few more seconds. But yeah, I think it's very clear there that 96% of you agree that this is a fact. If we go over to the next slide. So yes, indeed, it's true that working with ASM associations is essential. And really, the report and the case studies, they show this, they illustrate this. Many of the case studies, many of the interventions are working with ASM associations and national NGOs and other groups that are really plugged into those associations. And so we really highlight in the report that they are valuable partners with extensive networks, many of whom are already engaged in advocacy with government, and they can support kind of efforts through working with their members on messaging and commitments on decent work, as well as data collection. And I think one of the great examples, if we go to the next slide, we show this through our two final focus areas, the fifth one being eradicating child labor and promoting decent work, of which there are 5 case studies. And then number 6 in our reflections on collaborating for change, and we have 2 case studies. And I'd like to invite Gabriela Flores now, who wrote a case study around the work that the International Institute for Environment and Development have been doing with ASM associations in Ghana and Tanzania. So Gabriela, if you're able to unmute yourself and let us know now about some more of this work and the case study from the report. Thank you.
Of course, many thanks, James, and congratulations to you and to the rest of the DELF team on the launch of the report. You must be very relieved. For those of you who don't know us, the International Institute for Environment and Development is an independent research organization working towards sustainable development through evidence, action, influence, and partnerships. The IIED-ASM dialogues were national processes held in Ghana and Tanzania that combine research, engagement, and communications to identify solutions to the most pressing challenges to ASM formalization and to develop roadmaps to support ASM communities to thrive. There was also a communications component aiming to challenge negative perceptions of the sector and create more balanced narratives about ASM through stories highlighting positive practices, many of those in partnership with associations. National associations in Ghana and Tanzania were essential partners of both processes. We worked with Ghana's National Association of Small-Scale Miners, NASM, and its Women Miners Group. In Tanzania, we work with the National Federation Association, or FEMATA, and its regional chapters, Tarema and Marema, and of course, with the Tanzania Women's Miners Association, or TAWUMA. Their engagement and support was critical to help the stakeholders that participated in the dialogues to arrive at a common understanding of the local context and the perspectives and priorities of miners and local communities. Associations helped us bring these groups to the table in ways that both made sense and were of value to them. Our work also benefited from the mechanisms that associations have in place to communicate directly with their members, be them women gemstone miners, license holders, laborers, or members of the local community. As people coming from the outside, it was important for us to understand the composition of association, the different voices within these groups, and the ways in which decisions are made. Needless to say, the membership of associations is diverse, and each association has its own structure and dynamics. In recent years, the number of associations and networks in the ASM space has increased, and their role is becoming more prominent. There are now regional and continental networks, such as the Association of Women in Mining in Africa, national ASM unions established by government, as those in Bolivia and Nigeria, new women associations, and commodity-based associations too. Despite this diversity, what they do have in common is an impressive convening power and the trust of their members. There is much, as of yet, unrealized potential for those in the decent work agenda to partner with associations to improve occupational health and safety, to facilitate learning and collaboration among associations around the world, and to continue to build the sector's evidence base, all of which are essential to support ASM to be the best engine of local sustainable development that it can be. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much, Gabriella. It's a really interesting case study that and really shows the power there of working with associations. And indeed, as with the other focus areas, we have two reflections that show that. So we advocate for engaging socioeconomic network of actors to overcome some of these entrenched behaviors and labor practices. And we also advocate for concerted partnerships, as we've discussed there. We're now going to open in a second to a general question and answer session where we'd like to invite you to put some questions in the chat, and Professor Gavin Hilson, along with Nathan and I, will help facilitate that. In doing so, the questions can be to any of the contributors here and any of the other speakers we've seen today. We also have a couple of videos that we're not going to show, but are on the site, and I really do encourage you to check out the Delve Report microsite. We have one from the Deputy Commissioner of Guyana Geology and Mines, Mrs. Diane MacDonald, as well as one from Georgette Barnes, from the President of the Association of Women in Mining in Africa, talking about some of these issues. So over to you, Gavin and Nathan, for this final 5 to 6 minutes of questions before we have a wrap up from Rachel. And please do put your questions in the chat.
Thank you, James. Yes, as James has indicated, if anyone has any questions, please write them in the chat box. I have one. I don't know if I should get maybe things kicked off here. Going back to Gabriella, my question is, the associations you worked with, are they helping miners secure licenses? And if they're not, what role do you see associations potentially playing in that area?
Thank you, Gavin. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you very much for the question. I think it's important to stress that associations are incredibly diverse. We have associations that perhaps are more akin to networks where members share knowledge and resources, and some organizations that perhaps are more representative in terms of politics and advocacy. So I do think that it's important to start by understanding the wide diversity of voices and functions and abilities across the board. Definitely, we saw that some supported members in terms of the license process, in terms of understanding many times very complex processes, very complex requirements, and perhaps helping them make sense of what was expected of them in order for them to be able to access formalization. So yes, there are some examples in many countries, and I've seen more of those in Latin America than elsewhere. But I think it's important to recognize that associations also play extremely important roles in terms of doing advocacy for the sector before government and other decision makers, but also in terms of potentially sharing information. And as I mentioned in my intervention, their convening power is something that we can all gain a lot from. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. We have a question in the chat box on whether we have any data on children in ASM, and I'd like to ask James this question, direct this question to James.
Sure. The short answer is yes, we do. In fact, one of the focus areas is solely about child labor, and as well as creating, youth employment in terms of decent work. And as part of the overview in the report, we looked at the data on children in mining. And suffice to say, as with a lot of ASM, it's sketchy. There's some good data. There's a lot of data recycling, which is something we highlighted in the report. But if you head over to the microsite for the report, you can find in the appendix a table with some of that data and a discussion as well in focus area 5 in the report. So please do have a look at that. And it'd be great to have a conversation about how we improve data on the number of children and what that means.
Thanks, James. We have a question from Charlie here on what are your views on central bank involvement in gold buying and ASM formalization? Over to any of the speakers, if they have any views on this quickly. We need to turn it over to Rachel quick.
I mean, if Priya's got her hand up there, maybe she can talk to that. Otherwise,
okay, Priya.
Oh, thanks. I think, we've learned from multiple jurisdictions now, whether it's in the Latin American context with Peru and Chile, but also now with recent initiatives such as the Presidential Artisanal Gold Mining Initiative in Nigeria, that central banks are really stepping up in this space as a way to be aggregators, to provide a market assurance, very importantly. We see that they're already pegging to LBME standards. I think the real challenge, though, is driving down transparency and accountability all the way down to mine site level. And this is where initiatives like Delve, particularly in terms of being able to start to triangulate data, are going to be really important to supporting that assurance function. But certainly, I think we have collectively, as a community of practice, again, a number of different models. There's particularly on the continent. I think where we're starting to see more of a gap in this space, though, is regionally in terms of Asia, particularly in terms of stepping up the accountability and assurance mechanisms that the central banks could play.
Thanks, Priya. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel now to wrap up the session.
Great, thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, James, for great moderation. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. The sort of little teaser glimpses we gave you of the case studies through our various contributors today is a small little bit of everything that you'll find in that report. So obviously, we would really encourage you to visit the microsite. Nate put it in the chat and I re-put it in there. The videos are there that we didn't get to play. Sorry about that. And also the report itself in there, and Nate put it up there. As we've said a couple times throughout the meeting today, we really want to make this year, the year of occupational health and safety. And we intend through this report to have created, that groundswell of enthusiasm And we're really looking for organizations to become committed to that agenda even more than they are currently. We're going to be having a number of events over the year where we're going to be reminding ourselves on some of the ways in which we can achieve through simple, cost-effective measures, better occupational health and safety for miners and obviously for communities more broadly. And we hope that you would join in those. But also, if this is an area that really interests you to participate as part of the campaign this year, please do get in touch with us. You can get in touch with myself, Nate, James. We intend to roll out various activities and are really looking to find ways to put the spotlight on current work and to really just build a global momentum around this really important issue. So with that, I think we will close. Thank you again for having joined us today. For those that may be interested in hearing some of the case studies and the work that's taking place with our Asian partners, we will be doing a second event this evening at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're more than welcome to join in that one. And of course, the recordings will be available later. So please enjoy the rest of your day. Continue to do the good work that you're doing. And we hope that you've been inspired by some of the cases that we've highlighted today. Thank you.